Hello everybody, in this review we continue Requests Month with Hitman Absolution for PC, Xbox 360, and PlayStation 3. This is the 5th game in the Hitman series, and the first one to be published under Square Enix. It was developed by IO Interactive and released in November of 2012, and it's kind of interesting, because it was considered a betrayal by pretty much all of the Hitman fans. And when I first saw it, I looked at it and went, why did they do this? Because they decided to make it a very different game from the previous games, which is kind of a shame because Blood Money was absolutely fantastic. And then you get to Absolution and it's just this wildly different direction. So, is the fan backlash justified here, or did this new direction actually pay off? Well, before we really get into the meat of the game, let's first talk about the presentation, where nobody really denies that it's absolutely phenomenal. The graphics in this game are spectacular. It runs in the Glacier 2 engine, and it's the first game to do so. And what you get as a result is extreme amounts of detail in the environments, in the characters, their animations, all of that. The only real downside to it is that they overuse things like bloom lighting and lens flare, and there's this really annoying film grain effect, and I don't know how to get rid of it. But other than those, the game looks absolutely phenomenal, and in particular, there's a lot of open areas with a lot of people in them. And these actually end up being just as good looking as the parts that are sparse on people. So they're to be commended for doing an absolutely phenomenal job making sure the visuals were top-notch, as well as being able to have these large open environments where there's tons and tons of people in them. That said, the voice acting is a bit of a mixed bag. I say that because quality-wise, it's phenomenal. The actors all do fantastic jobs. But they do such fantastic jobs that it really exposes the flaws in the writing. And they're saying a lot of lines that just sound absurd, and their characters are ridiculous. So these phenomenal voice actors end up being kind of wasted on these crappy characters. I know that bleeds over into the storyline a bit, but we'll get to that in a moment. As far as the rest of the sound effects go, they did a really good job with all of the sound effects, all the environmental sounds. The music is even quite good. And it fits with the Hitman vibe pretty well for the most part. But that's not really what matters in the long run here. And that's certainly not what people got up in arms about. No, what really matter are the story and the gameplay, and they're also the two most divisive issues in the game. The story in particular, because it was given way more emphasis than any of the previous Hitman games. In fact, it's what dictates literally everything in this game. And it just ends up being ridiculous. 47 is, at the very beginning of the game, tasked with finding and killing his former handler, Diana. And she tells him to keep this girl safe that she stole from the agency. And obviously, whenever the agency's involved, it's not going to be good. So 47 ends up going rogue, basically. And while the agency's trying to track him down and get the girl back, he's also running into these various antagonists. The major one being Blake Dexter. He's basically an arms dealer. And that's pretty much it. He's also completely psychotic. He's a total sadist, all that sort of thing. In fact, all of the villains in this game are rather strong, as far as people that you hate and want to take out go. They're not very well characterized, however, because they end up just being ridiculous. In fact, everything in this game is ridiculous. The whole premise of the plot is absurd. The plot itself is absurd. And it ends up being basically Hollywood action rather than Hitman. In fact, this entire game just feels wrong in every single aspect. Literally everything. The story, the way you're going about things, the level design, every single thing is centered around that story and being Hollywood action, not Hitman. So, right off the bat, they've done it wrong. and the plot really fizzles out toward the end anyway, and ends up just having this rather cheesy ending. I was extremely disappointed in the whole single-player campaign, as far as its plot went especially. But what about the gameplay? Well, the level design, like I said, is not designed to be Hitman anymore, which is a real shame, because that's what made the previous games great. It wasn't the writing, it was the gameplay, where you went into these levels and you felt like you were trying to be this, silent assassin kind of character. And the harder you tried, the better it got, basically. In Absolution, it pretty much forgoes everything you know. There's still the elements there that you would expect from Hitman. You still sneak around, find disguises, distract guards, all that sort of thing. And you try to find a variety of ways to take out targets when you do have them. But a very, very large portion of this game is spent evading, where you're trying not to get spotted and trying not to take anybody out. It's so unlike Hitman that it just feels wrong immediately, and that there's so much of that in the game is a real shame. Then when you get to these levels that open up and give you various targets, you suddenly see that, hey, they did remember that this is a Hitman game, and in some ways, it's even better than the previous games. Part of this comes from engine enhancements, but at the same time, they screwed a lot of things up. So for every moment where you're using the environment to take out your targets, make it look like an accident, and have these awesome moments where you just feel incredibly satisfied with taking out the bad guys, in so many other instances, it just gets ridiculous, like when you're in a disguise, for instance, where nobody else will actually notice you, basically, but if you're in a place where you're not supposed to be, which makes sense, or if you walk by someone who is in the same sort of disguise as you, it just throws everything off kilter, because then they almost instantly spot you. Well, what do you do in that instance? Well, you go to your instinct meter. Yep, instinct. Instinct's used for a variety of things. The one I just mentioned is called blending, where when you walk past someone, you use this button and it makes you blend and they don't spot you. Well, you can also use it to see enemies through walls, which actually doesn't use instinct, it just activates the meter, basically. You can also use it to do point shooting, which is basically the mark and execute thing from Splinter Cell Conviction, where 47 can instantly take out a variety of targets very quickly. It's ridiculous. It just feels wrong in every aspect, and having this instinct meter in the game is a huge detriment, especially considering it's designed to be played with that instinct meter. If you're playing on the purest difficulty, good luck. You're gonna need it, because, like I said, this game operates on its instinct mechanics. It doesn't play like Hitman anymore. And ultimately, that's the biggest problem I have with it. The vast majority of levels are very, very linear. It doesn't open up and let you take out targets except for a few instances in the entire game. And what's sad is, those moments tend to be pretty fantastic. They have their ridiculous things with the disguises and being blown very easily, but at the same time, when you're able to actually take out a target and then get away without ever having been spotted, it's immensely satisfying. But then you have the vast majority of the other levels where it just ends up feeling wrong in every aspect, and in fact, towards the end, it feels like it's just trying to be an action game rather than a stealth game. It's like they couldn't figure out what they wanted to do with it and just said, screw it, we're going to throw all this junk in here. So for every moment that's great, you have so many more that are terrible. It's just this roller coaster in the single-player campaign. And it feels wrong in so many spots and feels right in only a few. It's just a real shame, because when those moments happen, you can see where this game could have been absolutely brilliant, but it's just so few and far between that you just can't. So that leaves the contracts mode. The contracts mode is basically this multiplayer-ish system. I say multiplayer because it's still single player. You're still doing everything yourself. But this is where other players can create contracts. They'll go into levels. They'll mark various targets. They'll take them out in a certain way. And then that's how you're supposed to actually go through those contracts. It's an interesting idea. The problem is it doesn't really work all that well, because the levels aren't designed for it. So what ends up happening is that you'll go into these things, and it'll basically just be the single-player missions, but with different targets, or if there wasn't a target, then there now will be one, and it just feels weird having to go through these things. So I largely avoided the contracts mode, except just to try it out and see how it is. It doesn't work very well. So what improvements did they make in general? Well, shooting's better. They added in a cover system, and it works pretty well for the most part. That's about it. I mean, there's more interactions with the environments in limited aspects, and some of those are pretty great, but by and large, they just missed the mark on every single thing in this game. They just didn't understand what made Hitman great to begin with. Or maybe they did, and they just tried something different to appeal to the masses. I don't know. But this game is too niche to be something that appeals to the masses. It's not easy enough for them. But at the same time, it just feels wrong for Hitman fans. So I don't know who this game's for. I really don't. It's just this jumbled mess. It doesn't really know what it's doing. And there are moments that are absolutely brilliant, but for the most part, the game is just incredibly disappointing. Compound that with the fact that I had a lot of performance issues playing this thing. A lot of that's just because my processor is aging, but even then, it's just not a great experience. And having followed up Blood Money is especially a problem, because Blood Money was absolutely brilliant. Then you get to this, and it's just a step back in far too many ways. So in the long run, that gets it a 2 out of 5. Thanks for watching.